Good evening, brothers and sisters. It's wonderful that we can talk about Bible prophecy, and the subject of this series is called "The Restoration of All Things." And as Dan said, that's the question is, what things? And this is obviously talking about, what is going to happen when Jesus returns. What's this got to do with the kingdom? Now, I'm going to be assuming a few things here. I'm going to be assuming that you have somewhat of a familiarity of basic Bible prophecy passages, such as Ezekiel 38 and Zechariah 14. Right? And because we're going to be referring to those over the next few weeks, without sort of going into the into the exact detail. So I need you to be familiar, particularly with those two chapters. Now, some of the content of this class, these classes, may be new to you, and some of them may not be. But to our Christadelphian fathers, what we are about to study was the bread and butter of their hope. Now, some of the concepts that we go through are fairly straightforward. Others are difficult. And I'll try and do my best to explain things logically. If I lose you, please stop me and ask me to clarify what I'm saying. Now, with Bible prophecy in the Brotherhood, there is quite a range of beliefs, and that's okay. So that's all good. We believe our commonality is the Birmingham Amended Statement of Faith, and when it comes to Bible prophecy, I guess there is a little bit of variance there, and so if you feel that you believe something different, that's all good, and maybe we can discuss that afterwards. So now, with some of the things that I'm talking about over the whole range of these studies, there are some facts that can be easily ascertained from the Bible, yet there are some things which are logically inferred, and there are some things which I've even had to guess. So for each of these things, I'll try and be clear whether they are fact or perhaps inferred. I'll try and do that. So when looking at Bible prophecy, there we go. I've read a fair bit of material here, okay? And I've listened to a number of different studies from different brothers. And there's a list of these some of the ones that I've seen. Now, I don't know if you can see this. The basic structure of what I've got in this series comes from this book. You can see it's not a very thick book. I think there's something like there's 56 pages in this book, written in a very old-fashioned way, and it's written like that because it was written by Brother John Thomas, and I can't remember the date he wrote this. And it's called The Mystery of the Covenant of the Holy Land Explained. Now, if you've ever tried to read Brother Thomas's writings, they're pretty challenging to read. I'm not the best reader in the world. For some of the things I have to read over and over and over again just to see what's being said. But that's just me. I'm not the best reader. But yeah, it is amazing how much Brother Thomas actually knew about prophecy. It is unbelievable when you read what he wrote back then. So let's get on with it now. And we're going to start by reading this passage. All right. It's Acts chapter 3, and we're going to read verses 19 to 21. Now, I might ask Brother Dan if you could read that for me, please. And it's going to talk about, it's going to go right into the core of the subject about and it's going to mention something, an important phrase here. Acts chapter 3, verses 19 to 21.
Repent ye, therefore, and be converted, that your sins may be blotted out, when the times of refreshing shall come from the presence of the Lord. And he shall send Jesus Christ, which before was preached unto you, whom the heaven must receive until the times of restitution of all things, which God hath spoken by the mouth of his holy prophets since the world began.
All right. So this is the phrase, which is the title of these talks. Brother Dan read the restitution of all things. In the New King James, it has the restoration of all things. Now, think about it. This is the Apostle Peter preaching the gospel to the Jews. Okay, and he says, look, God's going to send Jesus Christ, whom heaven must receive until the time of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began. And so this time of restoration of all things is something that is not new in the scriptures. It's not just a New Testament thing. It has been. Peter says it's something that all the holy prophets have spoken about in old times. So my question then is, and I'll ask you this question. So please feel free to respond. If you get a different answer to what I'm expecting, that's okay. Just feel free to respond. I'm going to ask a question. What things will be restored?
Kingdom to Israel?
Yeah, okay. All right. So very good answer. So Brother Robert said the kingdom to Israel. Now, how do we know that? Well, if we just come back to Acts 1 and verse 6, this is what the disciples asked the Lord. They said, it says, when they came together, they asked him, saying, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Okay, so we perhaps get a hint here that the restoration of all things is actually the restoration of Israel. Okay. Now, what do we mean by the restoration of Israel? Are we talking about the return of Jews back to the land in 1948? Or are we talking about something that is still yet to happen? Well, can I suggest that it's something that is still yet to happen? In Matthew 19, I'll just put it on the screen. I'll put this quote on the screen here, and I'll just read it from here. This is something that Jesus said. He said, assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, or if you like, restoration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's and you can see here. So in that time of restoration, well, it's got to do with the 12 tribes of Israel, or the restoration of them. Now, this part of Bible prophecy is actually core to the understanding of the gospel. It's actually core. It's really core to our Christadelphian statement of faith. So I don't know if any of you have looked at the Constitution, and you find that Moorebank Ecclesia has a Constitution, and in it we have the 30 clauses of the Birmingham Amended Statement of Faith. The last time I went through this was, I tend to go through this whenever I take someone through for baptism. And I usually, for their statement of faith, for the candidate statement of faith, I usually get them to summarize those 30 clauses in their own words. But it's interesting that out of those 30 clauses of our statement of faith, there are 2 that directly relate to this subject about the restoration of Israel. Let's have a look at them. So clause 21, it says this. It says, this is what we believe, right? We as Christadelphians, we believe this, that the kingdom which he will establish will be the kingdom of Israel restored in the territory it formerly occupied. Interesting, right? In the territory it formerly occupied. I want you to hold that thought till we get to the very final class, which could be about a year away. All right. So that's a long time to keep that thought. All right. The kingdom which he will establish will be the kingdom of Israel restored in the territory it formerly occupied, namely the land bequeathed for an everlasting possession to Abraham and his seed, the Christ, by covenant. All right. And then there's a number of quotes there that the statement of faith lists as evidence for this belief. All right. So that's one clause there. The second one is this, clause 22, that this restoration of the kingdom again to Israel will involve the ingathering of God's chosen but scattered nation, the Jews, their reinstatement in the land of their fathers. Okay, and then so the restoration of all things involves the restoration of Jews from all over the world into the land of their fathers, into the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then here, just as just a little bit of a little snippet here from Elpis Israel, which is a book that Brother John Thomas wrote to promote the gospel. He says this. He says the restoration of Israel is a most important feature of the divine economy. So in God's plan and purpose, the restoration of Israel is so important to understand that they are integral to this to God's plan and purpose. He says it is indispensable to the setting up of the kingdom of God, for they are the kingdom. Okay. So when we think about the kingdom of God, we think about a restored Israel to the land. All right. So 2 clauses from our statement of faith are mentioned here. And I guess this is Bible prophecy. This is the essential Bible prophecy that we need to understand if we are to believe the gospel and be a Christadelphian. All right. So we'll move on to this next little bit here. So I'm going to ask you a question here. All right. And feel free to answer or not answer. Was this verse here fulfilled in 1948? And this is from Jeremiah 30, verse 3. It says, "For behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, that I will bring back from captivity my people Israel and Judah, says Yahweh. And I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it." So was this, how about I ask this question? I'll make it easier for you. Was this totally fulfilled in 1948, do you think?
No.
No. And why do you say that, Robert?
It speaks of the captivity of my people Israel, which won't happen until Christ returns and Elijah goes forth to call them back home.
Yeah, good. Okay, so what Robert's suggesting is that there's a significant part of this prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet. And if some of you suggest that maybe this has partly been fulfilled, well, I could agree with that. All right, there has been a partial return of the Jews to the land. We say, yeah, that's for sure. We see that. We see that as a huge sign of Bible prophecy. But if we had to say that has this verse been fulfilled, we would say, no, it hasn't been fulfilled. Certainly hasn't been totally fulfilled yet. I'm going to put up another verse here. All right. So, and again, I'll ask this question: was this fulfilled in 1948? And this one's a bit more familiar to us. And funnily enough, I actually bring this one up when we used to do the seminars. It says, this one's from Ezekiel 37. It says, surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. Now, what do you think there? Do you think, was that verse fulfilled in 1948?
I'm going to say it was partly fulfilled then, but it goes on to talk about one king.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's yeah. I could say with that. So we could say, yep, it was partly fulfilled because yes, there are Jews in the land, right? But when he says, "I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel," may I suggest that actually hasn't been fulfilled, because like Dan said, he says, "And one king will be king of them all." That's talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, certainly, I remember putting this presentation together for our Bible seminars, and I did put this slide to show, look, all the Jews that have returned back into the land. But it comes with a caveat, because it has only been very, very partly fulfilled. And I want to show you why this has only been partly fulfilled. Because, and see, this was my problem when I first came into the truth, when I first became a Christadelphian. As a I don't know how old I was, 22, 23 at the time when I was introduced to the truth. I was so excited that, a lot of Bible prophecy was being fulfilled today. So I was looking throughout the scriptures and relating just about every Bible passage that talked about the restoration of Israel. I was relating it back to 1948. And I was getting ultra confused, because I think I was wrong by doing that, right? I was wrong by assuming that all these passages that we read in the prophets were talking about 1948. In fact, after doing this study, and I'm going to show you what opened my eyes in a moment, but I realized that I needed to look at the Old Testament prophets with a fresh set of eyes, and this is the passage that changed my mind. I'm going to ask that we turn there, please. Can we turn to Deuteronomy chapter 30? So remember, old brother Dave Zammit used to think that all these passages that talked about return of the Jews to the land and restoration of Israel and all that were fulfilled in 1948, until I took this passage seriously in Deuteronomy 30. Now, remember the context of Deuteronomy 30, because it comes after Deuteronomy 28 and 29, right? So that's so Deuteronomy 28, if those of you are familiar with the Bible, Deuteronomy 28 talked about the blessings and the cursings. And in the cursings, it talked about how the Jews would be scattered. But then in chapter 30, it talks about a regathering of the Jews. Let's read about that in verse 1. It says, actually, Dan, do you mind reading that for me, please?
And it came to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessings and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee.
Okay, sorry, and verses 1 to 3.
And shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, and with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee.
All right, thanks. So look at the condition that God puts on the return of the Jews to the land. He says, if you call to mind, in other words, you start meditating, start thinking about the blessings and the cursings, right? And you think about them while you're scattered around all the nations of the world, and you return to Yahweh. All right, that's Malachi 4, by the way. Right? And you return to Yahweh your God and obey his voice according to all that I command you today, you and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul, that Yahweh your God will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you, and he will gather you again from all the nations where Yahweh your God has scattered you. And verse 4 says, if any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under heaven, from there Yahweh your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you. And then God will bring you back to the land which your fathers possessed, etc., etc. Right? Can you see it's conditional? The restoration of Israel is conditional on them returning to Yahweh. Right? And that's why Brother Thomas could see that, well, there would be a, the proper restoration of Israel would happen after Jesus returns. Okay. And so this made me think, oh, those verses in the Bible which talk about the restoration of Israel, a lot of them are yet to be fulfilled. There are some that have been fulfilled for sure, but can I suggest that the vast majority of prophecies that talk about the restoration of the Jews to the land are yet to happen. Okay, so that's a big call. Okay, and that's and I got to say that after I realized that, it has really unlocked the understanding of prophecy to me. Anyway, by all means, if you have a different opinion, that's all good. I'm okay with that. But and look, this is one thing. This has also changed my view as well, because when I first came into the truth, I would look upon natural Israel, and when I say natural Israel, Israelis in the land, and think that, well, whatever they do must be right. It must be God. God has consented to that war and to this war and to that battle and all that sort of thing, and therefore, as Christadelphians, we should favour everything that they do. Can I suggest that that's a totally wrong view of natural Israel? Because they are yet to come back into covenant relationship with God, and therefore what they do is just the same as any other nation, any other nation trying to defend themselves. And sure, we certainly, as brothers and sisters, we have an affinity. We can see that they are God's people, certainly lost people, but they have lost their way, but they are yet to return to Yahweh is, I guess, the key there. Are there any comments on that? Because I will clarify what I'm saying shortly, but any comments there?
David, I think I love that verse in front of us, because it said in Ezekiel 37 verse 21 to 22, it says, I'll make you one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel.
Yep.
And Israel was known, yes, in the old days unto David and Solomon, but then it changed its name when the Romans invaded.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was known as all sorts of names, and then it became Palestine.
Yeah.
Until 1948, and when they became a nation.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
and that's
you read that, and I think, oh, that's a little bit of prophecy. Just a
100%.
Yes.
100%. 1948. That, what happened in 1948 is an amazing sign of Christ's return. Absolutely amazing, and it should still continually get us excited. And it's still, when we see things happening in the land today, and this subject has become very relevant, I guess, because of what's happening in the land today. It should stir us up, okay. But what we've got to realise is the people of the land there, the Jews, the Israelis rather, are yet to be converted. All right, so that prophecy in Deuteronomy 30 is yet to be fulfilled. Agree? They haven't turned to God yet. So, what I'm going to suggest here is that we read in a number of Bible prophecies in the Old Testament, particularly, we read two identities. All right, Judah and Israel. So, do they mean the same thing? I mean, are they referring to the one nation, or do they refer to two different groups of people? So as you probably know, there are many who say that, well, Judah was dispensed with in AD 70. There are people, religious groups that say that Israel and Judah, God has finished with them. And so back in my day, when I was looking for the truth, there was a group called the Worldwide Church of God, and they believe that the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes of Israel, Britain and America, and at the time. And I remember saying, I thought, oh, that's interesting, and I wanted to know more about that. They believe that they were the Anglo-Saxon peoples. Well, I don't think that's correct. The Jehovah's Witnesses would say that that God has definitely dispensed with Israel, the natural Jew, and they say that, well, they say that, well, when God speaks about Israel in modern context, they say, well, that's referring to spiritual Israelites, or inferring that it's the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves. So my question is, Judah and Israel, who are these people in Bible prophecy? Well, let's have a look here in Jeremiah 31. So can we read this passage? Let's see. Do I have it on? Let's read this. Let's Jeremiah 31, verse 31.
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah.
All right, thanks. So there's going to come a day when God is going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Do you notice there's two identities there? There's the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And now, how do we know? How can we prove that this is not talking about modern day Christians, or it's not talking about the British or the Americans or the Jehovah's Witnesses or whoever? How do we know it's not talking about them? How do we know it's actually talking about Israelites?
I suppose the next verse talking about their coming out of Egypt.
Yeah, very good. See, because verse 32, that's an excellent answer. So verse 32, he says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Well, that's, to me, when I read that, that's talking about Israelites. My covenant which they broke, well, that's Israelites. And so, and though I was a husband to them, and God was a husband to the nation of Israel. So if God was, if historically that was talking about the nation of Israel, well, what we'd expect to see then is this is talking about a restored nation of Israel. Now, and, you might think, oh, well, Jeremiah 31, that's Old Testament stuff. Is that relevant to us today? We're as Christians, we believe the New Testament, don't we? But isn't this passage is quoted in the New Testament? It's actually quoted in Hebrews 8. It says, it says, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It's not a redundant prophecy. It is still relevant to today, okay, and is still yet to be fulfilled. But there are two identities there, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And so there are two identities in the last days. So when we in a lot of the time in the Bible, you'll read these two identities. So who are they talking about here? So look at this passage on the screen here from Jeremiah 3. It says, in those days, the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel. Now, you notice I've coloured them. Every time I brought these up, they're coloured. I've put Judah in yellow and Israel in green there. Notice that on the screen? So it's in those days, the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given as an inheritance to your fathers. Now, has that passage been fulfilled yet? Now, I'm going to give you now what do we say in the seminars? You know, we always say this when we're talking to an interested friend. How can you understand a passage in the Bible? Well, you've got to look at its context, right? How about we just turn there, Jeremiah chapter 3, and have a bit of a look here. So we were in Jeremiah 30. Come over to Jeremiah chapter 3. And my question is, has this been fulfilled yet? And in Jeremiah 3, the context of verse 18, I guess, would be it starts from verse 14, we'll say. Well, actually, it starts from verse 12, and it starts by saying, return, backsliding Israel. All right, so it's God's plea to return. And can I suggest there that these are the words that Elijah will speak in the future? This is Malachi 4, of turning the hearts of the children to the fathers. Return, backsliding Israel. Verse 13. Only acknowledge your iniquity, that you have transgressed against Yahweh. Verse 14. Return, O backsliding children, says Yahweh, for I am married to you. I will take you, one from a city, two from a family, and bring you to Zion. Verse 15, and I will give you shepherds according to my heart, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. Okay. And verse 17, for the sake of time, verse 17, at that time Jerusalem shall be called the throne of Yahweh, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, to the name of Yahweh, to Jerusalem. They shall walk no more after the stubbornness of their evil heart. In those days, the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they will come together out of the land of the north to the land that I've given as an inheritance to your fathers. Can I suggest to you that verse has yet to be fulfilled? Okay, it hasn't. I'm going to suggest to you that it hasn't been fulfilled at all yet. Okay, this verse I'm going to talk about, God willing, if Christ doesn't return, in a way future class. Okay, but I want to show you there are two identities, right, in future Bible prophecy: the house of Judah and the house of Israel. Look at this one in Isaiah 11. It says, he will set up a banner for the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Again, two identities: the outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah. And again, may I suggest to you that this passage has not yet been fulfilled. Okay? So, two identities in the last days. Who are these two identities? And just to go on just a little bit more here, let's turn to Ezekiel chapter 37. All right, we're just sort of skimming a few passages from the Old Testament prophets because remember, the Apostle Peter said, he said, the restoration of all things which is spoken by the mouth of all the holy prophets since the world began. So we're just sort of gleaning from a few of those holy prophets here. Dan, do you mind reading verses 15 to 22? So Ezekiel 37, verses 15 to 22, please.
The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions, and then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel and his companions, and join them one to another into one stick, and they shall become one in thine hand. And when the children of thy people shall speak unto thee, saying, Wilt thou not show us what thou meanest by these? Say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in mine hand. And the sticks whereon thou writest shall be in thine hand before their eyes, and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all.
All right, thanks. So here we go. We're told we've got two identities in the last days. We've got, it says on the screen here, you've got the stick of Joseph, because it's symbolized by two sticks. It's got the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and he's going to join that with the stick of Judah. Now, in this case, I've got Joseph in green, because Joseph and Ephraim is synonymous with Israel. Okay, they were the separate tribes there, but they represented, if you like, the tribes of Israel as such. And notice there, it's that the stick of Joseph is going to be joined with the stick of Judah, not the other way around. Now, that's interesting, because that's the order that it's going to happen. And it says, it says there, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations wherever they have gone and bring them into their own land and make them one nation upon the mountains of Israel. So these two, the scattered Jews, are going to be brought together with the people, with the Jews who are in the land. Now, let's try and understand who these two identities are. Okay, so remember we talked about Israel and Judah. I want to talk about them historically. So you may remember from your Old Testament reading that Israel was united under David and Solomon. Okay, all 12 tribes were controlled by one king, David, and then Solomon. Okay, but unfortunately, there was, and I was going to say, this is the only time that Israel was all together. But then, unfortunately, when David's son Rehoboam came to the throne, the kingdom split. Okay, so after Solomon died, Israel and Judah separated, and that's because Rehoboam was pretty insistent on raising the taxes and making their burdens harder. So Israel said, we've had enough of this. See to your own tents, O David. And so the kingdom of Israel split. So the southern kingdom, sorry, the northern kingdom, the northern 10 tribes were referred to as Israel, and the southern 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin were referred to as Judah. So we had kings of Israel, okay, and we had kings of Judah, 2 kingdoms. We had 2 identities historically, okay, those 2 kingdoms, Israel and Judah. And then what happened was in 700 BC or thereabouts, the northern kingdom of Israel was taken captive. Okay, so the Assyrians came down, invaded Samaria, the capital, and the people of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, those people were taken out of the land and resettled in other parts of the world. Okay. And what the Assyrians did was they brought Gentiles, if you like, from other parts of the world, other parts of the nations they conquered, and they brought them into the land, and they became known as the Samaritans. Okay, and so it's 700 BC. If you looked at the world, if you had an atlas of the area, you will see the kingdom of Judah there. That was still there to the south. They were still in the land. So Hezekiah and Manasseh and Josiah, all those kings were still there, but there was no Israel. Okay, so Israel at that time were Israelites who were living in other nations, right? Fair enough. And we would say Judah were Israelites who were living in the land. Now, remember, I don't know if you realize this, but most of the Old Testament prophets, like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they wrote their prophecies about this time and afterwards. Okay, so at the time when a lot of these prophets wrote their prophecies of the future, Judah referred to Israelites living in the land, and Israel referred to Israelites living among the nations. Do you get that? Because this is really important. It's a really important key to understanding latter-day Bible prophecy. All right, so what happened later on? Well, then from about 606 BC, Judah went into captivity. Okay, the Babylonians came in, Nebuchadnezzar came in, and bit by bit, the people were taken captive, and they went into captivity into Babylon. But from about 536 onwards, Jews returned to the land. Right, the Persians took over. King Cyrus, said, "All right." He made a proclamation for the Jews to return to the land, and so Judah returned to the land. They were in captivity for about 70 years, as the prophet said. Okay, so Judah returned to the land, and so Judah returned from captivity at that time. However, this is really important. Israel never returned to their land. So even at this point in time, there was a Judah in the southern part of the land. They returned. The northern 10 tribes never returned to the land. Right? And so in the days, when you're reading books of like Ezra and Nehemiah, so this is after the return of the captivity from Babylon, when you read these books, Ezra and Nehemiah, you'll see that sure, there's sometimes the people who have returned to the land, sure, sometimes they're referred to as the children of Israel because, yep, I guess they're still Israelites, but it is called Judah. Like, for example, when Nehemiah said to the king, he said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask you that you send me to Judah." So politically speaking, They were called Judah. So, when it comes to latter-day Bible prophecy, and when you read these two identities, Israel and Judah, in the same context, right? This is really important what I'm saying here. When you read these two names in the same context, this is what we suggest they mean. That Judah refers to Jews living in the land of Israel. Whereas if you read about Israel, it's referring to Jews living in other nations at the time of Christ's coming. Okay? Okay, so let me say that again. If we're reading latter-day Bible prophecy and it mentions both these names, Judah and Israel, in the same context, Judah will refer to the Jews who are living in the land at the time of Christ's coming, whereas Israel will refer to Jews living in the rest of the world at the time of Christ's coming. Is that a fair enough conclusion? I think it is, because I think this is a really important key to understanding latter-day Bible prophecy. And so we see on the map there, as Roz said, we get excited because they actually named that land in the Middle East, they actually named it Israel, which really gets us exciting. But when it comes to Bible prophecy, where these two names appear together, God sees it as Judah. Okay? So what's happening in the land today with the wars that are going on, that's actually, we're referring to that as Judah. So let's move on. All right. So in this prophecy there in Zechariah 12, it says, Yahweh will save the tents of Judah first, referring to the Jews who are living in the land. All right. Whereas Israel is referring to scattered Jews among the nations. Remember, when these two names appear in the same context, does this rule apply? Okay. All right. And so when he says, surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations wherever they have gone, well, he's referring to the Jews who are scattered around the world. All right. So just sort of coming to the last slides now. Now, what did Brother Thomas believe on this? Well, would you believe that he really looked into this two identities thing, right? The thing with Brother Thomas, he was so intelligent. He's like an engineer, right? At work, I'm a tradesman, right? So a very simple mind and so forth. And if I go and ask an engineer a question, I get this super complicated answer that I don't understand, right? So one of the reasons I'm good at training at work is I can eventually work out what an engineer is saying and then explain it to a tradesman in sort of simple terms. Now, Brother Thomas wasn't real good at that, right? Brother Thomas was an engineer. He wasn't an engineer. He was a doctor, actually. He's worse. But he had such a fantastic mind that he assumed that everyone would just understand what he's saying. So he would just blurt things out without, like he would just say about two identities in the land, or two identities, Judah and Israel, expecting everyone will understand that. But he didn't explain why. And hopefully what I've done earlier is try to explain why he understands this. But this is what Brother Thomas believed. And this is the amazing mind. Remember, this is a brother who lived in the 1800s. No other Christadelphians around, okay? It didn't have other brothers and sisters in the truth to bounce these things off. Amazing brother who believed these things. And this is what he says in Help Us Israel. He says, the truth is, there are two stages in the restoration of the Jews. The first is before the Battle of Armageddon. The second, after it. But both pre-millennial. Now, what does he mean by that? Okay, so he's saying there's two stages of all this, because he identified that these two identities, Judah and Israel. And he said, well, Judah, well, they will return to the land before the Battle of Armageddon. And that's true. We've seen that, and that's still happening. All right, that's what we see we see in the land today. All right, before the Battle of Armageddon, Jews have returned to the land. But he says the second stage would happen after the Battle of Armageddon. You notice I've got that in green, because that's the restoration of Israel. When God says, I will bring the children of Israel from among the nations wherever they have gone and bring them into their own land. That's the second stage. That will happen after Armageddon. That is what we call the second Exodus. Right? Now, when we think about the second Exodus, it is going to be far greater than the first Exodus. You know, the first Exodus, when God brought the children of Israel through the Red Sea, through the wilderness, and brought them into the land, and so many, the 10 plagues of Egypt, all that sort of thing. Whenever the Psalm, a lot of the Psalms refer back to those great historical miracles of the Old Testament, where God's awesome wonder was displayed. Well, in Jeremiah, God says, you know what? In the future, God's not going to be known as the God who brought the children of Israel from the land of Egypt. He's not going to be famous for that anymore. He's going to be known as the God who brought, as Yahweh who brought the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands where he's driven them. That's what God is going to be famous for. The second Exodus is going to far outweigh the first Exodus by a mile. So where Brother Thomas says the second stage, that is going to be incredibly huge. That hasn't happened yet, because that's after the Battle of Armageddon. But he says they're both premillennial. In other words, the millennium doesn't start till all the Jews are back in the land and the kingdom has been restored to Israel. That's when the 1,000 years of peace will begin. Does that make sense? And it's just incredible how Brother Thomas understood this. Now I love this passage. Now, this little passage here, the snippet from Elpis Israel, is incredible. And I just want to read it again. I know we're all familiar, sorry, not all familiar. Some of us are familiar with this. I just want to read it because it's just fantastic how he knew this. He says, there is then a partial and primary restoration of Jews before the manifestation, before the coming of Christ, right? A partial and primary restoration, right? Which is to serve as the nucleus or the basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after Jesus has appeared in the kingdom. Right? So what he's saying is, what we see, we can see this looking back. So what he's saying, look, in 1948, there's going to be a small restoration of Jews before Christ comes. But he says the pre-adventual colonization of Palestine, in other words, I think this is engineer talk, right? Before Jesus comes back, those Jews who return to Palestine, they're going to return on purely political principles. And the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus and of the truth that is in him. They will immigrate there as agriculturists and traders in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth, but more immediately in getting rich in silver and gold, etc., right? Incredible how he understood that. Okay. Now, maybe I'll say, no, I was going to comment on something. I'll save it for next week. So he understood that there would be two stages of the restoration of Israel. A partial one, which we've started to see, but a bigger one that happens afterwards, after Christ comes back. And he says this is quite an incredible statement he says. There's a passage in Isaiah 8 verse 14 where it says this. It says, that's talking about Jesus. Jesus will be as a sanctuary. He's going to be a sanctuary. But he's going to be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel. Now, these are not my words. This is what Brother Thomas says. He says in Elpis Israel, he says, Jesus has already been a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to Judah and his companions for 40 years, from the day of Pentecost to the destruction of the temple. In other words, that part, to both the houses of Israel, to Judah, that's already happened, right? That's before AD 70. But what Brother Thomas suggests is that this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled in relation to the remaining 10 tribes, to the Jews who are still scattered around the world. He's suggesting that Jesus will be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense yet to happen. Anyway, I'll skip that. Just something to think about. We see these little maps of things of all these Jews have returned to the land, right? Judah. But there are still a lot of Jews still scattered around the world. And if I looking at the Israeli or the Jewish population figures, core Jewish population figures around the world, in 2020, there were 14.8 million Jews all around the world. In the land, there were 6.8 million, you could say. And that constitutes Judah. 46% of the core Jewish population live in the land. Whereas in the nations, there's still 8 million Jews. And they constitute, in modern day Bible prophecy, Israel. Okay. Now, those Jews need to be brought back into the land after Christ comes back. That's the second Exodus. Okay. And if we look at these are 2016 stats. This is the latest map I could find like this. You see, right, there's a big circle around Israel, right? But there's a huge circle also in the United States. By far, the majority of Jews living outside the land live in the United States, and a lot live in Canada as well. A lot live in Russia and, in Ukraine and Australia and other places in France. So all scattered around the world, South America, etc. There are latter-day Israel and Judah. Okay, that's what we're looking at. This is the last slide. All right. Just want to end with these words here. I love this passage because it just gives me goosebumps when I think about this passage in Jeremiah 30. Because you think about a prophet like Jeremiah, like Ezekiel, penning these words that they were inspired to write. Isaiah, the prophets would have been confused because, what is this talking? The prophet would be thinking, is this talking about now? Or is this talking about 20, 30 years, 40 years time, 50 years? Daniel was told, he says, go your way. He says, it's going to be a long time before the time of the end. But what God says, he says, look, God says in Jeremiah 30 verse 24, he says, the fierce anger of Yahweh will not turn back until he has performed and until he has accomplished the intent of his heart. What's the intent of his heart? It's to restore all things. It's to restore again the kingdom to Israel. And whilst these things were confusing to the prophets at the time, and perhaps to the readers and so forth, to the disciples, they were confused. God says, in the latter days, you will understand this. And isn't it beautiful, brothers and sisters, that we can have a class where we can talk about these things and explore these things? And look, even if we don't get them 100% right, let's really look into these things and try and understand what God has got in store for the people of Israel. God will not rest until Israel is restored. Thanks.